My name is Sarah Cochran and I am Chief Curator here at the church. I would like to acknowledge Christine Sciulli, who is the impetus for today's program. I am deeply grateful to Christine for the work she did on the piece under which we sit, The Weight of Water, which is the inspiration for the program today. I am here to do some brief introductions and also to explain the run of show for today. I also have a very, very important job, which is to please silence your phones. But before I silence my phone, I would like to, my glasses. The church would like to acknowledge that is situated on what traditionally is the Shinnecock, Montucket and Manset unceded land. We acknowledge and honour all the Indigenous communities and their fundamental relationship to the region in the past, the present and the future. This is going to be particularly important given the subject today. So essentially the way today is going to run is that we will have a presentation and a conversation by the lovely individuals who are over on the other side of the stage. Senator Sanders will be joining us, and you have all received hopefully cards and a pen. What we're going to ask you to do is, if you have questions, please write them down. And you can sort of raise them in the air and we will come and collect them. We will be collating questions in the back. So we hope to get to a shape of your question, if not your question exactly, but please understand that our time is limited. And with that, I would like to give just a short introduction to the very honoured and lovely speakers who have joined us today. We are deeply grateful to each of you for bringing your expertise and also your knowledge to us this morning. I will start with Meghan McGinley, who is the Director of Education at the Sag Harbor Cinema. She is the former manager of Forgetting to Remember, which of course is the excellent program that was run by Sag Harbor Cinema and also the Plain Sight Project. This project was funded by a grant from the US Department of Education, and Meghan is currently a doctoral candidate at Vanderbilt University. So we're deeply grateful to have her here, and thank you for the time stolen from your doctorate studies. Carrie Clark is the Ross School Dean of Cultural History. She teaches grade 11 cultural history. She holds a BA in history from UCLA and an MA in sunny Stony Brook, and she has been involved in adapting some of the curriculum in order to work with the 11th grade. This is obviously essential work, and we are delighted to have you with us too. Cara Nelson is the social studies teacher at the East Hampton Middle School. She has been there for 11 years, which is incredibly important work. She is also a force of nature, literally. She is the Guinness World Record holder for the fastest female time at the world's highest trail marathon, which is on Mount Kilimanjaro. And she has also completed, but wait, there's more. She has also completed the World Marathon Challenge, which is running 7 marathons in 7 days across 7 continents. That deserves a round of applause. You will hear a lot more about James Saunders Jr., who is a New York State Senator. But we should just note here that he is a 6th-term senator, devoted public servant, community advocate, Marine veteran and family man. He has a BA in African Studies from Brooklands College, and he served previously to being a senator 10 years on the Queen's School Board. So again, somebody whose expertise is going to be essential to this conversation. And then last but not least, Christine Sciulli, who is a visual artist based in New York City and Amagansett. She is known for her immersive light installations, which have been shown in the United States and also in Europe. She is also a community activist, and in 2020, I had the enormous pleasure of working with her on her overarching project, Present Tense Black Lives Matter. We did that with, obviously, Christine managing it, but Guildhall, the church, and also Duck Creek all worked together on that. She holds a BA in Architectural Engineering from Penn, an MFA in Hunter College. She teaches at Parsons, and she is currently doing graduate work in social work at NYU. Please help me to welcome our panelists.
Oh, that works. Thank you guys for coming. I mean, this moment to me is like a strange dream come true. I've always wanted to combine my art practice with social activism, and I have never really found the exact right platform to do that. I wanted to open with this quote. So I'm going to talk about the work, I'm going to talk about the connection to education, and then policy. But policy and the effort to create a reparations movement and program is kind of part and parcel of what led me in the development of this particular work. The consequences of slavery in New York State is not an echo of the past, but can be observed in daily life. So the title of the bill that Senator Sanders is going to be speaking later, the title of this bill kind of sums up everything about, to me, like the inspiration for this piece. The title is very long, but it's the title of the bill which created the New York State Reparations Commission, and it was voted on finally after being introduced in 2017 for the first time in December of 2023. It's an act to acknowledge the fundamental injustice, cruelty, brutality, and inhumanity of slavery in the city of New York and the state of New York, to establish the New York State Community Commission on Reparations Remedies, to examine the institution of slavery, subsequently de jure and de facto racial and economic discrimination against the people of African descent, and the impact of those forces on living people of African descent, and to make determinations regarding compensation and providing for the repeal of such provisions upon expiration thereof. So that was actually approved. The commission has been formed. The work starts in June, and they have 18 months to do their study and to make recommendations to New York State. I have the clicker. So I'm really excited to see you guys today, and I thank you for coming. So I was trying to build this project around momentum that had started in 2020 with COVID, with social justice movements around Black Lives Matter, and a lot of people were worried, like, what's going to happen in 4 years? Where are you all going to be? Like, you're here with me now, but will you be with me later? And I kind of committed to being their leader. I didn't have the opportunity to put together a show. I was busy doing shows that were light installations, but when Sarah approached me, I think 2 years ago, I thought, well, this is my platform. This is my time to share my platform, to try to move over a bit. So I created this project knowing that the title would be fundamental to the reception of the work and to the conversations that started. And I worked with Meghan, I guess starting about 6 months ago, trying to put together this program and see how we could tie education, because history is really important to understanding where to go. And so, and then we wanted to have someone speak from the reparations side of things, so then Senator Sanders got involved about a month ago. I have the clicker, I keep forgetting the clicker. I put together this chart, which is a combination of different things from like Congress, from people who've aggregated, who's been in power when, and the number of times that HR 40, which is the United States Reparation Commission bill, which has not even reached the floor for a vote. This is a similar bill to what New York State is trying to do, and it's just to study the problem. It's just to study what happened in slavery and how it's played out through lives today. It impacts policy, it impacts people's ability to get housing, to get adequate health care, education, social mobility that a lot of people just take for granted. They take for granted that they have a house and they can pass it on to their kids or use it for collateral for a college loan. So this bill's been introduced every year since 1995 with the exception of one session in Congress. And you can see that, the laser pointer here, I'm not gonna use it. But you can see that as the Black Lives Matter movement starts to gain momentum in 2013 and then Obama gets elected, we see a surge of co-sponsors, this graph is co-sponsors in Congress who are supporting Conyers and so then supporting Sheila Jackson. It peaks when Biden has office in 2021. It peaks when we all stood there and said, we want this to happen. We want a better world. We want social justice. It peaked after the murder of George Floyd, and we were all in the streets. In 2021, Biden was inaugurated, and we had control of the Congress, and it still couldn't get passed. And I don't know if you guys watched the hearings of the Reparation Commission, but it was really, in one way, uplifting to hear people tell their stories of how the system has been built against them. And then equally decimating to realize that it couldn't even move to a vote on the floor. And this is when we had complete control. So then Biden loses, we lose the House, and then political will starts to decline. So the number of co-sponsors in the House, granted there are less Democrats to support the bill, but this isn't a Democrat issue, right? It should be a human issue. So it was public support, meaning pressure on your legislators to be behind this bill starts to decline. So I wouldn't say that this work is a work of activism, but I have artivism. I have defined a problem, which is part of it, and I've made a piece that is set to bring a conversation to the floor and I've engaged people to go out into the community. So this has been really important to me. It's not perfect, but it's my start. And thankfully, Sarah and I are planning on trying to take this, and Megan, I hope, to broader audiences in different places in the country. So now I'm going to talk about where I've been a bit. So in 2020, I started a project. I was working with a group organized by Tali Hincus that was called Artists for Nancy. And I wanted to get people actually out to vote and put together a coalition of 63 artists. And a lot of you were here, thank you. We made videos and projected them in places from Brooklyn to East Hampton. And it was a non-partisan message, just come out, vote, voice yourselves. Democracy matters, right? There's no point in being in this country if you're not going to get out and vote. But a lot of marginalized places do not vote. Through school, I ended up doing a policy brief for teen pregnancy prevention in the South Bronx. And the district that has the highest rate of teen pregnancy, no matter what interventions have been enacted, has the absolute lowest voter turnout in basically the whole country. And they've given up. So I worked with an organization that's really great called Center for Artistic Activism, which is where I learned a lot about how to engage with the public. And my partner, Nora Green, and I got a grant of $10,000 to do an action across the state of Pennsylvania. And the best thing about the project was that we were able to pay a lot of community organizations. So we had the Sixers Drumline, who was started by this guy, Anton Mapp, and his grandmother, who just wanted to keep him safe. So he gets kids from the neighborhoods, they learn how to play drums, they get out and drum for the Sixers. He gives them, tutoring opportunities. They get food on Saturdays when they're out all day getting, carted around from show to show. And then we work with PA Youth Votes, another amazing organization run by Angelique Hinton. And we had superheroes, information superheroes. And those kids were incredible. They knew more about gerrymandering than anybody I know. And it was a, quote, off-year election, which we know there's no such thing as an off-year election. So these kids were answering questions on the street in People's Park in Philadelphia, and then we had a commensurate action in Pittsburgh. We made flags with gerrymandered districts. And what was at stake in this off-year election in Philadelphia was the judge election. So if you have bad judges, they support bad districting. So there was actually a lot at stake because one judge in particular needed to get voted out. He did. I don't think we helped though, but I like to think we did. Another sort of super fun action that I did was with Center for Artistic Activism during COVID. So during COVID-19, it was called Season 3 of Free the Vaccine. And you sat in seminars every week and you had small group projects to work on. So it was a cohort of 50 people, mostly students from all over the world, and we worked on vaccine equity. One of my colleagues and I did a punch card. He's in Pittsburgh. So we did a punch card where people should just, go around and have conversations about the vaccine. And if you did have conversations, you could go and get a free coffee. Harbor Market actually participated with us. But a lot of the problems about vaccinations, as we can probably remember back, is there was a lot of skepticism. And a lot of that was rooted in racist policies and testing on people. I also developed a giant a toolkit because they said we're doing these actions. I went to an action, it was a people's shareholder meeting at Pfizer, and we were asking for the patent to be released. And so we had a giant syringe. So they wanted a toolkit plan so that you could send it all over the country and people could make their own toolkit out of household parts or things you could just get at the hardware store. So that's what the plan is over there. And that's me in the Care Bear outfit at the Washington Monument. And as we were protesting for vaccine equity, for sharing is caring was the tagline from Center for Artistic Activism, the news came through that the United States was backing a patent waiver. And then another thing that I'm proud of, and it's a funny thing to say, but I actually am, was the night that Ruth Ginsburg passed away, I got people to send me images, and I took a projector and found a plug at Hook Mill in East Hampton and made a memorial, a vigil for her. So a lot of people would just stop by and talked about, well, God, what do we do now? I mean, half of it was mourning her death, but the bigger part was mourning what happens now. We know that didn't go well. So now I'm going to back up and talk about this project, The Weight of Water. So I had thought that I was doing some kind of activist work in the abstract light installations that I was doing, but I think it was way too obscure. So part of it was taking these simple geometric shapes and projecting them onto elaborate networks of fabric or string. And people would be positioned, and sometimes they would just see squiggles. Like a lot of people think these are just squiggles, but I don't really do that kind of abstraction work. The squiggles were because you were out of sync with the projector. So if you stood in line with the projector, everything flattened out, and if you moved to the side of the projector, you would see something abstracted. And nobody could possibly have the same point of view. This is an installation of Cologne. So I like to work really big. It's something that I've always enjoyed. I don't know why. And I like to work with an architectural rhythm. So you'll see this work is organized around the windows and strategically not hitting the lights and reaching from one side of the space to the other. And in this project, I'd taken this really beautiful architectural balustrade and the rhythm of beams and this column and created a language where the strings that supported the projection piece ran from the balcony railing, bounced off of the column, and then translated to an pointed beam in the ceiling. So it was very architecturally regulated or regimented, but the piece itself was sort of ethereal. This is a projection network that I made at Southampton Arts Center, where I was projecting lines of light, planes of light onto string. So the language of working with string and rope is something that I have explored. This is the mapping of the planes of light onto the string and results in points of light. And it's video, this isn't a video, but it is video projection, so the planes of light move around so it looks like swarms of lights, dots of light. So in the rope work that I've done, this is at Southampton Arts Center. Ironically, like 3 of these slides in a row are Southampton Arts Center. But I wanted to do something during COVID where people could feel connected, but not be physically engaged with each other. So I had this idea of making a line drawing that people could change. So you'd walk into the space and someone will have taken a string from a cleat on the wall and hoisted it, and then put it back together. And then it would be different and you would manipulate it. And I think that was on the heels of this project. So I have the slides in reverse order. But this is a project that I love doing with Bastien, who's here. And we created a project called the Handoff Union Space, also in COVID. And 10 of our friends who are artists got together and did an exquisite corpse kind of installation. So I used my rope drawing, and Bastien had a grid on the wall. And artists would schedule themselves to come in for chunks of work time and work by themselves in the space, and then leave tie-ins for the next person to work from. So the making of this work, now to go back to this work in ropes in this space in this current time, started with my drawing waves. So waves, almost like sine waves, and my background is in light. So looking at like the spectrum of light, or looking at sound waves, or looking at waves in water was a language that I knew I wanted to use in this project. I worked in my studio to say, well, how do you get a curve that stays up in space? So I tried using reinforced rebar, curved rebar, and stuffing it into the rope. I tried using pencils and dowels. But the thing that seemed to work best was to suspend the rope with more rope, which was waxed sailcloth mending twine. So I had to figure out how I was going to actually support it. So I did some drawings trying to figure all that out before I committed to what the waves would be. And then looking at how they stacked up on each other. From the mezzanine view, which I hope you guys can go up there, and the rest of the work is really good. So then I took that stacked drawing and I looked at it in space on the computer with Vectorworks, and then developed a projection. And the projection went onto a life-size piece of paper in this corner over here. And this is a 30-second time-lapse of the entire installation. So we hoisted up each wave with conduit, and then each wave had to be transferred over onto the grid. But it was fun because I was actually, instead of drawing with the twine, I was drawing with rope. But at each juncture, I had to sew through the rope so that it would have a suspension point to the upper grid. And then after that work was done, I went up onto the mezzanine and did the other pieces. And then there was a lot of finishing work to do. So you make a tiny little loop at each line and each lead. And then there's a curved needle that my friend Liz gave me to work on with the rope. The rope's 2 inches thick. And there's Richie, one of the riggers, and Joe Diamond from, you guys might know from Southampton Arts Center, was like the master rigger to make sure that everything was in tension and did not fall apart. And it's still here, thankfully. So to skip ahead, give me a sec. So back to the weight of water, which refers to our responsibility. We did not create the system of slavery. We did not create people coming here and taking land that didn't belong to us or to them, but we do benefit from it. And every policy has been written mostly in the last century and most of this century by people who were not affected in an oppressed way. So I want to go back to the project that actually Sarah mentioned. And I was happy to produce this project for my friend Jeff Colvin. He wrote a book. Oops. Hi, Senator. So my friend Jeff Colvin wrote a book, Africaville, which follows, it's a multi-generational story following a family from their life in Africaville, Nova Scotia, and Halifax, which is a place which was destroyed through urban renewal, which has happened in so many places here. The place I studied in the South Bronx, the Cross Bronx Expressway displaced 40,000 people from their homes. And their homes were of no value because they'd been redlined. Which I have an op-ed about redlining in the reading room if you want to read it. Okay. Anyway, there was a 3-part effort, and it was during COVID. And Jeff said, I want to do a reading of my book. And I said, why don't you come out to Sag Harbor and do a reading? Like, I know some people, like, we could get you a reading. So then it turned into, what about a staged reading? But it was COVID. But Guildhall was game, and they let us work in the outdoor theater. And then he said, I have a friend who wants to make sound pieces about some of the text in the book and some of the themes of police brutality and social protest movements. I was like, well, let's ask Duck Creek if they can put it there. So, and then the other great part that the church was part of, and the church found funding for the project. They got a base grant from Sag Harbor Partnership to fund the project. I think we had $5,000, and we got some extra money, so everybody got paid, and we could fund the work. And there was a panel discussion of activists, like, where do we go from here? And his title, Present Tense, Black Lives Mattered, is a call to history. It's a call for us to really understand where we've been in order to go forward. This has sound attached to it. Uh-oh. My clicker's not clicking. I did get stuck on the lift without my cell phone, and it wouldn't go down, which I thought was absolutely impossible, but it happened. Luckily, somebody was here. I'm feeling that again. And sound. So Jeff installed this work. I don't hear the sound yet. He installed this work at Duck Creek in several, the mic is getting really loud. I can play it from my computer. At Duck Creek, in different places, I think there were 7 different pieces. And this one is about social protest movements. The social protest movements reflected in history in his novel. So this piece that Jeff created is true artivism to me. He's taking literature, he's combining it with other forms, and he's bringing it out into the public realm to people. I'm gonna play the sound from my computer. Okay. Hold on a second. Kristen, do you think we're going to get the sound? No. Can you hear Sean's voice here? Oh, anyway. Okay. Well, there's Trump saying that basically people out there destroying the memory of George Floyd are just anarchists, murderers, and looters. And then there's actual sound from people who are being brutalized by the police taken from handheld video cameras. It's a really powerful piece. How to get this audio out of it. Actually, I'll share the link for the video because I made a documentary video of it. And I need the clicker back. Kristen. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. And I find that people just don't know, right? We don't know. And it's important for us to educate ourselves and then to put pressure on our schools, on our elected officials, on our government to be able to make change. And I'm very fortunate that Meghan has wanted to be part of this project, and they're going to take it over from here and talk about how they have actually tried to move the needle into getting real education and real information out to the schools, in particular Ross School and East Hampton Middle School.
I am so grateful to be here today. Thank you so much, Christine, and thank you to the church for organizing this. It's my deep honor to share the work of the Forgetting to Remember project with you all. Christine, if I don't have the to share the work of the Forgetting to Remember project with you all. As it's been mentioned, my name is Meghan McGinley, and I'm the Director of Education at Sag Harbor Cinema, the former Forgetting to Remember project manager, and I remain a volunteer for the Plain Sight project. I came to this work as a concerned citizen who is deeply invested in social justice. I am not a historian, and I am not a scholar of the Atlantic world. My background is in French studies, and I specialize in French film. I am also a teacher and have taught French language and film. Leading this project has brought together the personal and the professional for me. My mother is a Black woman, and as a white passing person of mixed race heritage, it is important for me to better understand my positionality and the ways in which it's different from hers, from both sides of my family, and from the larger communities that I belong to. The idea of forgetting to remember recalled a quote to me coming from French studies from Marcel Proust, his 5th volume of In Search of Lost Time, in which he writes, "The real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes." This project and the work of the Plain Sight project has allowed me and many others to look at our familiar environment with new eyes, to discover hidden histories of enslaved, indentured, and free people of color that were foundational members to our community. Again, I'd like to thank the church for hosting us, Christine for envisioning this talk, Carrie Clark and Cara Nelson for joining us today, and the Forgetting to Remember project team, Donna Marie Barnes, David Rattray, Genevieve Villaflor, Anna Dezo, Ellen Young, Bill Collage, Dr. Jennifer Morgan, Sam Hamilton, Julian Alvarez, Jackie Dinan, and Daria Reven. Today with Carrie and Cara, we're going to talk about the implementation of the Forgetting to Remember curriculum in their classrooms. Carrie in grade 11 at the Ross School, and Cara in 7th grade at East Hampton Middle School. Today our discussion will touch upon notions of accessibility, adaptation, and the reception of this educational material. There we go. The Forgetting to Remember project was a 16-month collaboration between the Plain Sight project and Sag Harbor Cinema, funded by the United States Department of Education from 2022 to 2023. Its aim was to expand upon the critical work of the Plain Sight project, whose mission is to unearth the identities and the stories of enslaved, indentured, and free people of color on the east end of Long Island from the 1600s to the mid-19th century. During the project period, the Forgetting to Remember team had several objectives. We did 360 hours of archival research, held public exhibitions and events at Sag Harbor Cinema and the Eastville Community Historical Society with Dr. Georgette Greer-Key, produced a short-form documentary, Forgotten Founders, David Hempstead Sr., which perhaps many of you have seen. It won won the Audience Award at the Hamptons International Film Festival for Best Short Film last year. We commissioned an original portrait of David Hempstead Sr. from renowned local artist Michael Butler, which can be seen on the right-hand side of the screen. And we developed an inquiry-driven, place-based curriculum for a 7th grade level. What's going to be particularly interesting today is we're going to see how it was implemented on a 7th grade level, but also on an 11th grade level, which speaks to the adaptability of this curriculum across grade levels. Okay, the 3 main goals of the Forgetting to Remember curriculum: to understand that American slavery happened in the North, right here on Eastern Long Island, to know the names and the stories of some of those who were enslaved, indentured, and free people of color in our community, and for students to share their learning with others, so as there is an acknowledgement of this history. So here's a brief breakdown of the curriculum, which you also have on your postcards as well. So this inquiry-driven social studies project serves as an extension and a supplement to the existing New York State 7th grade social studies practices, content, and literary standards. At the center of this project's learning are New York State's and Long Island's forgotten founders. The project is structured through 2 connected case studies and 1 culminating unit for an authentic audience. And what is an authentic audience? It means that the product that students are creating at the end of these case studies reaches beyond the peers in their classroom and beyond getting a grade from their student. This project is geared towards a larger audience, ideally the community, so they're sharing their work beyond the classroom, and it has a much bigger impact on their learning and for the community at large. The learning expands around on-site or virtual fieldwork visits to Sag Harbor Cinema and Sag Harbor neighborhoods, where students are immersed in research about the history of Long Island's forgotten founders and the impacts of slavery on the enslaved, indentured, and free people of color in the American Northeast. So guiding questions and big ideas in case study 1. For students to understand, the practice of American slavery during the colonial period was widespread across the colonies, that enslaved people resisted their conditions and sought freedom. And 2 guiding questions throughout the curriculum. Why has the story of American slavery been largely misunderstood to have only happened in the South? And why are some of our founders forgotten? In case study 2, students move into understanding more about the process of abolishing slavery in New York State, and that it was a gradual process. Even though slavery was abolished in 1827, well before the Emancipation Proclamation, changes were slow to take root. The enslaved, indentured, and free people of color on Long Island organized and resisted to overcome the challenges of gradual emancipation. And the large question that they grapple with in case study 2, who was freedom for in the United States? And finally, in our culminating unit, case study 3, students ask themselves, what is my role in accurate retelling of a forgotten founder? And they work to synthesize information across the case studies to share with an authentic audience. What we envisioned in this curriculum is having students make a mini documentary based on forgotten founders, David Hempstead Sr., and all of the work that they've been doing with primary and secondary sources. So they work to retell a factual, place-based historical account about the enslaved, indentured, and free people of color in their communities. Last year was a pilot program. We're still working with schools, and we hope to see some of these mini documentaries in the coming year from Ross, from East Hampton Middle, Southampton Intermediate, and other schools on the East End. So transitioning to Carrie and Cara, my first question is, how did you learn about this curriculum or the work of the Plain Sight Project, and how have you incorporated it into your teaching?
Thanks, Megan, and it's nice to see you all here, thanks to the church too. The way that I use this curriculum, Ross School is an independent school, so we don't follow the New York State standards. I teach 11th grade history, so I worked this into my first unit. It's a global history curriculum, and at this time I'm teaching about nationalism, imperialism, and resistance. We start with the development of nationalism in Europe, its origins and its evolution over the 19th century, when it developed strategies for creating a national identity with symbols, and imposed languages, and other cultural products. And what I look at is the Southern secession, the Confederate States of America, as a nationalist movement moving away from the American, moving away from the Union. Oops. Okay. We begin by looking at examples of texts that describe America's national identity as it was being defined in the 19th century. Oh, I'm sorry, that's the wrong, I'm saying the wrong thing. I begin by showing them whitewashed history. I have seen a lot of textbooks that misrepresent the history of the United States, and you can see that the slide on the right describes the Africans who survived the Middle Passage as immigrants who came to America as workers to do chores, which is quite a misrepresentation of what was actually going on. And so in showing them not just this example, but several others, we talk about what's missing and what that implies, and how you learn about what is missing from the story. And that's how the Plain Sight Project and the Forgetting to Remember Project came in very handy. Next slide.
So in 2019, I actually had a former student come to the middle school to speak to me. He was now at the high school. He was in 9th grade. Now he is at Duke University at the moment right now. And he had injured himself and was no longer able to participate in track after school. So that had led him to get involved with the East Hampton Star and to work as a student intern with David Rattray. And he began working on the Plain Sight Project. And once he began this research to uncover the names of these enslaved individuals who had been lost to our history here in East Hampton, whose stories had never been told, he thought that it would be perfect to bring this to me. And so we scheduled a meeting. I sat down with my former student Jonathan, with David Rattray, and as a history teacher, as a student of history myself, I was shocked at what I myself did not know. And to sit there and to see them present all of these primary sources that are right here under our noses, to have learned about a grave of an enslaved individual right in East Hampton, to have found out that so many of the buildings that I drove by and walked by every single day were built on the backs of enslaved labor. It was a really powerful thing to also be given that information from a former student of myself. So we sat down and we decided that we were going to work together to bring this information to light to the students. So I sat down with Jonathan and with David, and we had many meetings, and we created resources, and they had given me primary sources to then implement in the classroom. So that's what began my work here, so with the Plain Sight Project, and then last year that expanded to the Forgetting to Remember Project, and that's when I was introduced to Megan, and we had our students last year now build on what they had already been doing in the classroom, and now they got to watch a documentary about another forgotten founder, David Hempstead, Sr. So for me, what was really important about bringing this to light for your students is, as an educator, you want them to be informed, right? For me, I'm never going to tell students what they have to believe, what perspective they must have, where they need to stand politically. But in order for them to become future participants of this country, they have to be informed, and they have to be given that information, and they have to be given the tools to be able to analyze that information. And so once I realized that I wasn't taught this, it's so easy for us to say, well, I wasn't taught this, I didn't know. But you have to break that cycle of ignorance. I didn't want to perpetuate that. And of course, I had always known about slavery here in the North, but you never understood the prevalence of it. And that's what was so shocking to me in all of the research that they have been able to do, to see how it was hidden in plain sight all this time.
Thank you, Cara. And Carrie, you're also developing a new course next year, as I understand it, with these materials.
Year after, yes. When I had always taught the Southern secession as a nationalist movement, what was great about the Plain Sight Project, and especially the Forgetting to Remember curriculum, that in Megan's outreach, she reached a colleague who then shared it with me, so I reached out to Megan, and that's how I became associated with it. And that curriculum is so good, and it had so many resources that I could use locally to teach about enslavement as it happened not just in the South, but also in the North. And this matters when we look at the way that American national identity was created over the 19th century. And so the curriculum is very rich, it's incredibly detailed, and there are so many excellent resources there, but teaching global history in my core class, it's very difficult for me to get through all of it. And so what I'd like to do, and I'm really excited about trying to do, is actually get my students to create the films that are suggested in the third case study, and even the links to the Plain Sight Project people, the people who have been given names and places and lives by that project. So I look forward to doing that. So I want to develop a curriculum. I want to develop a course next year, perhaps during our Field Academy term, which is a 2-week intensive, and ultimately move through all of the curriculum, because it's very detailed on every level and well scaffolded, and Megan and her colleagues did a great job.
Thank you both. I'm really excited to see the work that you do, and to see some of these many documentaries that students create based on the research that they do and what they learn in Case Study 1 and Case Study 2 of the curriculum. Moving on. How have your students responded to the curriculum? Have you noticed any differences in their engagement or understanding based on their grade level or their background? And this is an activity that Carrie has designed that she'll talk to you about.
Here you'll see, actually, this is a handout I got from the Forgetting to Remember curriculum, but reminding the students about the language that we use, for example, in that world geography textbook that I showed you. I asked the students to think about how language is used. And so this handout asks students to look at the words in the left-hand column, to define them, and then to think of a potential alternative that is more accurate. It comes from the Frederick Douglass Historic Site website, so there's a lot of explanatory material there for the students after. But first I asked them to do it themselves, which I'm now going to ask you to do. You don't need to give me the definition, I think we know those, but thinking about what a different word could be used for, say, master. Great time. Yes. Enslaver, yes. That is the term that is chosen, that is suggested by the site, the Frederick Douglass site. Fugitive, runaway, escapee. What's another word? Very good. Well, they're running away. So captive and hostage are two of the terms that people came up with for slave. But these are people who are away from slavery for the moment anyway, or maybe longer. Yes?
Freedoms.
Very good, that's right. Freedom Seeker is another one that is recommended by the site. And how about Discipline and Punish?
Torture.
Torture, abuse, yes. So we go through this exercise. They spend more time on it doing the definitions. And I wonder if you want to say something about your kids' reaction, and then I have a sample that I can share from my own students.
I think just very quickly with this, it's very important for us to understand language and how it's evolved, and the language that was used back then to justify the power structure that was in place, and how we need to actively change that now going forward. And things like this are important for students to be able to understand the power of words and how your words matter. And we need to speak about individuals with the decency and the respect and the humanization that they need and that they deserve.
On this next slide, we have an example from one of Carrie's students in response to this activity.
It was actually a pair of students, and one of them is international. About 40% of my students are international students, and they're aware of some of the broad brushstrokes. I chose this example to share because the students had some very impassioned responses to this. Like, you can see some of the examples: a trapped African person attempted to get freedom from hell, or, you know, unholy and evil practice. Some of it was very good. Some of them actually were very good at choosing the ones, you know, coming up with the ones that were recommended by the site that I referenced. But they put a lot of time and energy into it, and I think that it was very enduring. Later on, when, well, actually, I'll talk more about the enduring things they learned as we move through the curriculum after we look at another example.
Okay, perfect, thank you so much. Moving on, my next question. What resources or materials have you found most effective? We've included lots within the Forgetting to Remember curriculum itself, but of course there are more resources that Cara has worked with previously and that Carrie has incorporated for her grade 11 students. So what books, films, or primary resources have been particularly impactful for your students?
They loved the film when we saw the film. This is an image of some of the primary documents that I had them looking at, and by far the primary documents were so helpful. Not only were they really well contextualized, but there was an abundance of them, and they're all from the East End and Long Island. There are also wonderful links that are provided in the curriculum, including to a collection at Learning for Justice. And that is it's called Teaching Hard History, and there are 10 quite short videos from academics discussing various features of enslavement and what it actually, you know, in like 3-minute short clips. I don't know if any of you have seen them, but they're really, really good. And so I showed the students a couple of those. That was super helpful. I had worked with that collection before. But in this example, these are 3 of a set of 8 documents that I put together for the students with a little bit of context at the top, which I pulled from the site that came from FTR. And I gave them a worksheet to work with, and this was super, super helpful. And they were absolutely fascinated by it, just fascinated. Now, some of the texts are difficult to read because they're handwritten and they're old, so the materials that were provided also included a transcription. And I included those in the handouts that I gave them, and they had them work in pairs or trios on each of the 8 documents, and then they shared out what they found. And there's such a variety of them. The first one is a will in which I have notes here. The first one is a will in which there was a dispute amongst the children of a woman named Sarah Conklin, and in the text they reference things like the wench called Hope, which, you know, sounds really harsh to students today, but also just listening to or reading about how people were part of this, you know, collection of items to be bequeathed. In the middle, that's a stored ledger from the Havens General Store on Shelter Island, where if you look at the top, you probably can't see it, but there's the top and bottom sections of that column. The top column, all of the people are named Negro, like Negro Cato or Negro Phyllis or whatever their name was, but it begins with Negro. And then on the bottom, it doesn't say that. So the students were, appalled and fascinated, by that. And then the last one that you see up there is from a journal of a man named another Havens. And he kept a journal, and he just sort of lists in this particular passage the number of enslaved people and who they worked for. And it's very nonchalantly itemized, and there's quite a long list, and it really illustrates just the prevalence of the practice on Shelter Island. So those are just 3 of the many examples that can be found among the curriculum materials. Like I said, I used 8.
Thank you, Carrie. And I'm wondering, Cara, in 7th grade, transcriptions are incredibly helpful in approaching this material because a lot of the handwriting is incredibly difficult to read. Primary source documents fade over time. There's materiality attached to these that isn't always captured well in scans. So I'm wondering how your students responded to using primary source documents as well.
So just to back up for a second before I directly answer that question. As a teacher, one of the things that I constantly tell my students is we learn about the past to help us better inform our present, to understand what is happening right now, and then we use that to create a more just and equitable future. It was what you had been echoing since the beginning of this presentation. And as a history teacher, sometimes teaching about the past, students can feel very disjointed from it. It happened so long ago, not here, not my community, none of this really relates to them, and it's finding that through line for them. And with these primary sources and this curriculum that has been introduced, it has been able to provide these students with a through line from the past to the present and to this question of what do I do now that I know. And so in working with these primary sources and having them actually come from our community, from the area that they live in, that they are going to school in. So this one document right here, very difficult to see. The students struggle with it as well. On the Chromebooks, we blow it up. It's 200% zoom, and then even from there, they're struggling. But it is an inventory of David Gardner, and an inventory of everything that he owned in 1774. And when you look at something like this, you assume for somebody who has a lot of farmland, you're going to see your typical shovels, your axes, your hay, your oxen, your carts. And then, as they read through it, not only do they find those materials, but they find people. And for students in 7th grade to see that and not just think that this was something that happened down south in another state, but this was something that happened right here where I am as I'm looking at this. And to see on there that names of individuals, and there's a boy on there, Cato, age 12, the same age that they are as they're looking at these documents, and for them to be able to see that. And then the 2 tiny excerpts right there. One of them lists cheeses, and cheeses are listed as 14 gold. And then below it, you see a woman named Phyllis, aged 52 years, and she is valued at 8 gold. And for these students to then take a look and say, my gosh, there is an individual, a person, a human being, who 1, has a value placed to them, and number 2, is being valued at less than an assortment of cheeses. It is an extremely powerful moment to watch these students realize it and not look at it as something that didn't happen here, not our backyard, it was down south, but it was here, it was real. These people's stories are here, and they need to be told. These people should not be a name in an inventory book, but they should be stories that are uplifted, that are told, and that are continuing to be told throughout history.
Thank you, Cara. For the sake of time, here are some photos. So on the right-hand side, we have the screening that we did with Cara students last year in in 7th grade at East Hampton Middle. David there is doing a Q&A afterwards at the screening. And on the other side, we have Sam Hamilton, one of the co-directors of Forgotten Founders, David Hempstead Sr., and David Ratchley doing a Q&A at Sag Harbor Cinema with Carrie students in this past September. And the questions that students had, from vocabulary to the socioeconomic impact of slavery and how it's still very much evident in our communities today, every time, are astounding and inspiring to see how they grapple with this material and how they attempt to answer the question, now that we know, what do we do? And we've screened the film for students as young as 10 years old. Southampton Intermediate School has come to the Sag Harbor Cinema to screen the film as well, and did a Q&A afterwards. And again, the reception from the students to this material every single time, it's different and it's inspiring, and we hope to continue screening the films for student groups that are interested in seeing the film at the cinema. So moving on to reflections, my last question to you both: what advice would you give to other educators who are interested in adapting this curriculum for their own classrooms? As we've spoken about, this is very locally based, and though it's inquiry driven, the curriculum is rooted in this community. So if someone who is not in East Hampton or Sag Harbor wanted to use this in their classrooms, what advice would you give to them?
Well, I found, first of all, the material is very rich, it's comprehensive, and there's a lot of it. So I think that it can be pieces of it. I use pieces of it. Like I said, I want to do a course that takes advantage of all 3 case studies and has a culminating project that contributes to the body of work that's here, and your project and this wonderful work. But you can pull pieces from it if you're ever teaching about not just the history of enslavement in the United States, but of marginalized people in a number of places. My own students have applied some of what they learned about untold histories when they're looking elsewhere. For instance, a little bit later that unit, we were studying the European imperialism in the late 19th century, in which, among other things, they carved up Africa and took over a good chunk of that continent. And much of the histories that we learn about that is told through primary documents from the European point of view. And the students were really eager to learn about what the African people said. Like, how did the Maharera reply to the Germans, or what did the Asante say to the British when they showed up? And so they want to know the other side of the story, and I am able, it's not as easy, but I am able to find material, or the experience of African American soldiers in World War I, or the Navajo in World War II. We're going to be looking at code talkers, and there's a piece up there related. The Navajo code talkers when we're looking at World War II. Now, those 2 are American examples, but they're interested in what the Korean people thought when Korea became a Japanese colony in 1910. So I think having them look at the untold stories, and on the
Recording in progress.
The reflections that they noted, particularly the top one where they say that harmful legacies need to be corrected. This is from one of my students. And like I said, 40% of them are from abroad, but I think they have gotten a lot of lessons from looking at this very local, personal thing, especially since so many of them are surprised at the prevalence of enslavement right here in their hometowns, and for foreigners, so prevalent in the North. When they learned about the Red Summer of 1919, they were less surprised to hear that one of the major places that the rise took place was in Chicago, a northern city, and you know, that the legacy is not as simple, and the story is not as simple as it sometimes is portrayed.
So thank you so much, guys. That was really unbelievable. So as you guys know, we're running pretty late, and we're not entirely sure that the senator's still able to join us. He was on the Zoom. But I'm going to introduce him, and then we can move to Q&A if he's had to run off. But Senator James Sanders Jr. is currently in his 6th term as New York State Senator. He was elected to the 10th Senatorial District in 2012. He was born in Hamel Houses, a public housing development in Rockaways. He's a product of Southeast Queens. He earned his bachelor's degree. We've heard that from Sarah, sorry. But what I think is fascinating is he started his political career at the school board level, which is something we can all do, right? After the school board, where he was, then he was elected to district, he was at the school board, District 27, and he was president for 7 of his 10 years. He was the first African American to hold this position in his district. Then he ran for city council and was elected in 2001 and served until his time limit ran out for the term, and then became state senator. And he's been state senator ever since. He is the chairman on the Senate Committee on Banks and heads the Senate Task Force on Minority and Women-Owned Business Enterprise. And he's also the chairman, or he's on 11 other committees, including Commerce, Economic Development and Small Business, and Veterans, Homeland Security, and Military Affairs. He says, acknowledges that the journey forward is never easy, but he's willing to take the difficult path if it means that his constituents in Southeast Queens will be afforded the protections and access to resources that they deserve. Do we have the senator?
Working on it.
We could move to Q&A while we...
I suspect that you can hear me.
We can.
Hello!
Can you hear me?
Not yet.
All right.
I can hear you a little bit, but not everybody can hear you well.
It is good to be here with the church at Sag Harbor. One more time, I trust you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
All
We can,
right.
you can hear you, you're not on the screen yet. Can you see? We're getting you. Can you see me? Hi, thank you so much for joining us.
And I am projected, or I see it.
Hi!
I will continue to speak with the hope that you will get me and you'll give me a thumbs up when you see me on live. Perhaps I look better unseen, so I will continue to speak. There are so many things I can tell you. One of the most important things that I will tell you that's not on that resume is, and as you're backing away, I suspect that you either had me or you've given up.
No.
One of the things, the most important things that I could tell you, I do see that I'm being seen. I am, until 16, I was going to be a minister, a pastor. So I won awards for knowing the Bible, so I feel very comfortable with you here today as we speak of the Lord's work of justice, which we are meant to walk towards. I currently am working hard on the issue of reparations, as you may or may not know, and it is an issue that my whole life has been drawing me towards, and I guess I am here now. The historian indeed commends the previous speaker and the great work that you guys are doing with history, because even as we speak, America finds itself at war with itself, at war with the truth, at war with what is history, what will we tell ourselves, and we seem to be determined to to forget, to not remember, to not only consciously not remember the past, but to jail anyone who says that this pretty picture that we painted ourselves is not the truth. Look at Florida, look at other places, for example. So America seems to be at war with itself, and you guys are going to play an incredible part in this. Now, in order to do this, you got to do a couple of things. You have to remember that this union, this America, is just an experiment. An experiment. America is what you and I do or don't do every day. And if we, the children of Samuel Adams, of Tom Paine, of so many, if we, our school of thinking, in one sense, lost out in the American Revolution. I draw your attention to Charles Beard, for those of us who like to read history. Now, one school of thought lost out. Another school won. The well-heeled, the 1%, the rich and super rich, won, and they have presented a history of America, which is basically not true. But we who uphold the best traditions of America, uphold the best traditions of the church of the that didn't make its peace with Rome early on. We who hold the best traditions of the church are called upon in a time like this to help bring justice in this day and age. So I find myself at a curious juncture. I find myself a child of the church and understanding that the church has been called upon to intercede. You are called upon to be the intercession on earth for people, and we are called upon to intercede, and that doesn't mean that we simply sit back. So, with that tradition, and then with all of the political traditions that we found ourselves in, the civil rights, the women's rights, the struggle for gay rights, the struggle over the proper role of women in society, all of these things, we find ourselves as the children of these, and now we are faced with a strange place. On one hand, we see the pushback of all of the things that we fought for. All of the rights that we just knew were going to be extended are threatened. And this is epitomized, I would argue, by the rise of Donald Trump. On one hand, this epitomizes that one school of thought wants to go back to the 50s and the 40s. And then another school wants to go forward. We can see this when we look at the fall of affirmative action, what was left of it in the school system. I'm talking about the university, but we're also seeing it with several other things. Voting rights, something as sacred as the right to vote, being denied more and more and more places. So some would say that the best thing that we can do at a time like this is to hide, to say nothing, to make no sound. Hopefully it will pass over us. That's not the best theory, I would argue. I would say that the best defense is a good offense. And that, I would suggest to you, is a thing called reparations. Reparations to repair. Something that the church has no small knowledge of. Our history going back to when the Hebrews left Egypt. They were not sent out empty-handed. They were sent out with gifts and other gold jewelry, things that would help make them whole. So many Bible passages will speak to you of the need to repair and for us to stand in the gap to make sure that these things happen. So New York State is undergoing an incredible experiment where we have chosen nine people. This was my bill that is now the law of the land. We've chosen 9 people to study the issue of reparations, and to come up with findings. Now, they may find that there's no need for it. That's a possibility, and it's a fair committee. You have to have an honest committee. They may find that there is a need. They may find many different things. And I suspect that they're using a type of logic. They will come to a similar position that I do, that there is a need for reparations, and it needs to be massive to some degree. And I say that because every statistic, every study is saying that the wealth gap between black and white is growing larger, not smaller. It's expanding at a faster rate than ever before. I was speaking to a president of the Federal Reserve. For those who know banking, they know that that's the bank's bank, if you wish. I was speaking to one of the most learned men in society over the question of economics, and I said to them, short of reparations, is there any way that blacks can catch up in America? And without blinking an eye, I said, no. No, there's simply no way. You can all work great jobs, you can do whatever you wish. You're just not going to catch up. So if we want this America that we see, we're going to have to fight for it. We're going to have to really get out there. And the role of white people is going to be very interesting in this one. Very, very interesting. Those who have been shown the great light, those who have seen the truth, and I commend you. You're swimming upstream. You are. It is so difficult to be a person of conscience in this day and age, and especially a white person of conscience in this day and age. I commend you. It's easier for me. I have no choice. I must fight to survive. You can deny, you can live a life of blinding yourself, as so many do. So I commend you for trying to get the education that you need to decide what you want to do. This battle of reparations, if you wish, will not be fought in communities of color. Well, it will be fought, but it will be fought and won in the white community. Which means that you have a great role, that you have to wage spiritual warfare against powers and principalities, against powers in high places, where you will have to bring a truth of the gospel, a truth of here is how we can live together in peace. A battle for the beloved community which you are in a key space for. And I would encourage you to do this without guilt. Yes, American history is an incredible thing, and those of us who know it, again, I am a historian by training. It's an incredible thing, but guilt is not going to help us much. We need allies who understand that guilt should only be for those who are tied to things dead and dying. If you are not wedded to those things, if you're not determined to keep a system of oppression in place, then you should not operate from a place of guilt. You should operate from a place of hope, of love, of truth, that you are not going to be tied down by guilt. You're going to join hands with us and move towards love, truth, and hope. Hope that, of course, at the end of the day, our efforts will be blessed by God. will find redemption to some degree through our actions. We will find it by the things that we do on a daily basis. The small battles and large battles where we don't bend the knee to follow, that we just say no. We're not going to allow injustices in our lifetime. That there's nothing that anybody in this room can do about slavery past. We were not there, you couldn't intercede. But we can do something about things that are taking place before our very eyes. And those are the things that we will be held to account for. The sins of omission and commission. Omission in most of our lives. So, the process of reparations is easy enough. You're going to have 9 people go through a process. At the end of roughly a year, they're going to issue a report. And that report will go to the state legislature, and the state legislature will battle it out, and they will endorse 0 or some or all of the findings, and we will move towards a different New York, regardless of what happens from there. Now, I'm the kind of guy who loves questions, but I urge you, do not ask me any question that you don't want the answer to. Don't ask me, because I will give it to you. I'm here to give you the truth uncut. It's Sunday and we are in church. Church, of course, is where 2 or 3 are gathered in His name, and I suspect that there's at least 2 or 3 of you gathered in His name, so we are very much in church, and I try not to lie, and I certainly would not lie in the church. I'll stop for a moment and see if there's any questions about reparations, about history, about where we are going in New York, where we are going in America. If there are none tonight, have either bored you silly?
I do have a question.
Or there are no questions.
I have a question. I was just curious.
Oh, no, not you. You're too tough. No, not you. Someone else.
I was just curious if there was...
Of course, I'll take your question.
I was curious if there was examples of reparations historically that we can look to sort of study how it's been done.
Well, reparations actually occurs every day. And you may have heard that in Camp Lejeune at Marine Corps Base, there was the water was terrible, and people were drinking it for years, and it had carcinogens and cancer-causing substances, and made matters worse, government knew it. And by the time that the information came out to the public, the statute of limitations had passed in North Carolina where the camp was, and therefore no one could sue. The government passed a law saying, oh no, we're going to change those rules and we will try to repair those who have been hurt, who have been damaged. That's reparations, my friends. That's an attempt by government to repair for damages caused. Other attempts, of course, the largest one that everyone knows quickly are our Jewish brothers and sisters from the Holocaust, where they were made as whole as they could at that time. Now, let me remind you that the population in Germany was not in support of those reparations. They had 11% of the German population, polls show, who were in support of reparations at the end of World War II. Now, it's 95%. We start out in America at a higher level. 22% of the white population as a whole is in support of reparations. That's twice what they had in Germany. Other examples of reparations, of course, are the Japanese and how they were made whole after their internship. But you could also look to the Armenians who sued Turkey in a court in Los Angeles and won reparations over the Turkish massacres of, I believe, 1920 of that time period. There are many examples of reparations in Native Americans who have gotten some of their land back and some of their mineral rights. These are all examples of reparations. But if reparations happens for farmers who were rounded up, there was and civilians for that matter. There's a company that's called the son, Monsanto, there you go, made a product for Roundup, and it was found that it caused cancer, and yet the statute of limitations that passed on many of these cases, it was overturned, and therefore people can get payment. These are reparations. These are government attempts to make a population whole. I trust I answered the question decently.
Hi. What would you say about South Africa and the reparations there?
You're coming in shopping.
I said, can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh,
A little louder sounds would be nice.
My voice isn't the best this morning. I was wondering about South Africa. You didn't speak about them. I thought you all would be looking at that country more than, Monsanto, for instance.
South Africa is a very interesting example. Their Truth and Reconciliation Committee did some amazing work, but they dealt very little with trying to make people whole. They limited their making people whole to allow people to tell their stories. They did do a certain amount of some people in the most egregious circumstances getting some compensation, but the vast majority, the overwhelming majority of the people who told their stories were not made whole in terms of financial compensation. They were allowed to tell their stories, but that is basically all. So South Africa is an example of what to do, but we really want to go beyond that. That's would be the example of, or the equivalent of the Hebrews leaving Egypt and telling how they were treated in Egypt, but not given anything to make them whole as they were leaving out.
I see. So they weren't given any money.
Very few of them received any compensation, and what compensation they did receive, most people argue, was not equivalent to what they went through.
So what are African Americans? What's on the paper for us? I mean, is it for families of the enslaved in the South who moved to other places, or do you have to show proof? What's the deal? Is it going to be every African American in America, or what?
In America, I envision an attempt to make sure that there is equality of opportunity. Equality of opportunity, meaning that everybody starts out at the same place, that the starting line is made equal for every person, or as many people as we can, of course. And to do that, you have to deal with the wealth gap. And you will never have true equality of opportunity if white people have a minimum of, I've seen different studies on this, everything from 10 to 1 to close to $20 to $1 for every dollar that a black family has in wealth, not in money, not in salary, if you wish, but in wealth. And there are ways of measuring that. So you have to equalize the question of wealth. And you can do that many different ways. You can do that through a lot through education, a lot through the ability to buy a home, the ability to buy a business. There will be many attempts, and sadly I'm not on the committee that will put in this recommendation, so I can only tell you what are standard ideas that people use when they speak of trying to create equality of opportunity, and trying to create an even starting place in this race of life.
Hi, Senator Sanders. I have a question. Would you consider the Reimagining the Cross Bronx initiative as some form of reparations in the Bronx, South Bronx?
You say this one more time?
With the Reimagining the Cross Bronx initiative, that's talking about reconnecting the communities after the destruction of all of the communities that were taken over to build the Cross Bronx Expressway. And they're talking about knitting them back together, creating programs, maybe covering the Cross Bronx. And right now, it's just in the study stages.
If I heard your question right, forgive me if I haven't, but I'll give an interesting answer, even if it's not your question. One of the very ruthless features of the system of oppression that we found ourselves in and still do is how it ripped communities apart in the name of progress, in the name of making things better. So you can see this with communities that were whether it's a Cross Bronx Expressway, which divided a so-called minority community, whether it is roads in Tulsa, roads in upstate New York, Buffalo, that rip communities apart. Part of the efforts that we see undergoing now, the Biden administration actually, is trying to repair these roads that were driven through communities. We're trying to either put them underground and allow these communities to be bound back. Now, on the larger issue, since I'm taking a shot at your question, how do we repair the African community? How do we, the African American community, if you wish, what are the efforts that we will undertake? How do we deal with this generational trauma that these people find themselves in? How do we deal with this generational divestment of generational poverty, intergenerational poverty, and other things? Well, we will find the best way is to follow some of their best leaders. And there have always been efforts afoot to heal the breach internally. These efforts need to be joined by people of goodwill all over for our sake of all of us, as we deal with it. One reflection of this is the amount of mental illness that we find ourselves confronting, where we're now getting a slew of good studies have come out over what is causing all of the mental illness in many different communities, especially the communities of color. And the process of weathering, the process of oppression is really having an impact now on these communities. That's always had, but especially now. And we will, for the sake of all of us, because no one wants to be assaulted in the streets and no one wants to be pushed at the train or any of these other horrors that we hear. We have to deal with the madness that is producing madness. Now, I hope that that was in the ballpark of your question, but not on another day.
That one was excellent.
Comes to me, and I'd be glad to deal with your question. But I told you, even if it's not your question, I hope that you found the answer useful.
Absolutely. I mean, we're so grateful that you took the time to be with us today. Thank you so much, Senator Sanders. Thank you so much.
My telephone number, probably in the book, if anyone wants to catch up with me, you're more than welcome. I really appreciate the greatness that you guys are doing. You are showing some of the greatness of America and the greatness of God. So I urge you to go with God and be a blessing.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.